I'm Isabella Simmons, and I passed away on December 10th, 2023. This is an abrupt start, but there's no more polite way for me to tell you what I'm about to say. The lesson Jesus gave me when I was close to dying is too important for me to waste time on nice things. But before I tell you what he said about the churches of today, you need to know who I am and how I got this divine vision. Help me out by telling me where you are before we begin. Even though we're not together, it will be nice to feel closer. Don't forget to mark this story as liked and share your thoughts on what you thought about it. Let's talk about this in an honest way so we can all learn from each other. Have fun listening. I worked as an executive at one of Minneapolis's biggest healthcare companies for 20 years. I had the corner office on the 45th floor, the fancy car, and the lake house. Everything that society says means you're successful. That's another way to describe me. I was a calm Christian, putting money in the giving plate twice a month at a big, well-known church made me feel spiritually complete. Now that I look back, I can see how soundly I was asleep. The 12th of December started out like any other winter day in Minnesota. It was well below freezing when I got to the hospital for what should have been a simple gallbladder surgery. The sun wasn't even up yet. I remember making fun of the nurse, like I was going to miss an important board meeting while she took my vital signs. She smiled and said, "Better than missing Christmas." What I didn't know was that I would be meeting Jesus Christ himself in a few hours. I remember everything about the operating room. The cold steel table below me, the harsh fluorescent lights above, and the steady beeping of the instruments. The doctor of anesthesia, Dr. Chun, started to count backwards from 11. Before the room went dark at 7, I made it to 7. That should have been the last thing I thought about until I got better. But it was only the beginning. The first sign that something was wrong was when I looked down at my body while floating near the roof. I could see the medical team's faces go from normal focus to sudden alarm. The monitors were now screaming because my heart had stopped beating, because of a response I didn't expect to the anesthesia. As I watched them start chest compressions, I didn't feel scared. Instead, I had a strange sense of peace and calm. The tube came next. There are a lot of stories about this tunnel of light in near-death experiences, but nothing could have prepared me for the truth of it. Think of the cleanest, warmest, and most loving light you've ever seen, but multiply it by a huge number. It looked like the tunnel was living and full of divine energy. As I went through it, all of my fears, worries about the world went away. I felt complete peace and love that didn't depend on anything. But this was only the start. Not only would what happened next change my life, it would also change how I see what's going on in churches today and how important Jesus' message is for his followers. When the tube opened up, it was like walking into the throne room of heaven. I almost can't find the words to describe the beauty I saw there. Even the colors were out of this world. I had never seen them before and still can't explain them. Jesus Christ, the King of Kings, was there. I almost laugh when people ask me how I knew it was Jesus. It's like asking how you know the face of your mother or the voice of your child. There is no question when you're with him. His love is so strong. But what really moved me was how his eyes were filled with both happiness and sadness. Even though he looked at me with such kindness, I could tell his heart was sad because he had something important to say. He told Isabella, "I brought you here because my church is in danger. You need to remember everything you see today, even though it will be hard. You need to tell them. A lot of my kids are getting lost, and time is running out." The throne room around us changed as he spoke these words. All of a sudden, we were floating above what looked like a huge world map. But instead of government lines, I could see lights that stood for churches. Some burned clearly and brightly, but a lot of them were dim, or flickering with a strange kind of manufactured light. Jesus warned, "Pay close attention, because I am going to show you 4 very serious threats that are here today to my church. What you see will break your heart like it breaks mine, but my people need to know this." As we went down toward the first scene he wanted me to see, I felt his hand on mine. It really shocked me what he showed me about churches that focus on making money. But that was just the start of a journey that would show me how far many churches today have gone from his original goal. The first scene Jesus showed me came to life like a real-life 3D movie. As we went down, we saw a huge church building that could have been confused for a sports arena. There were lots of expensive cars in the parking lot, like Mercedes, BMWs, and Teslas, that shone like jewels in a crown under the lights. But Jesus' grip on my hand got tighter, and I could feel how sad he was. He told me to look deeper, and all of a sudden I could see what normal people couldn't see. There were spiritual beings moving through the crowd. They weren't the holy angels I had seen in the throne room. They were darker beings covered in fake light. They whispered in people's ears, offering them money, success, and happiness on earth in exchange for faith seeds. Even worse was what was going on inside the building. The sanctuary looked more like a fancy place to hold a meeting or a performance hall. A charismatic speaker walked around the stage in an Italian suit that probably cost more than most of his congregation made. In a month, his face was shown on several huge screens. He told them to give their best seed today. You have to let go of something for God to bless it. Do you want to join the Platinum Partners Circle? For just $10,000, you can attend our Prosperity Prophecy conferences without anyone else being able to. Through Jesus, I was able to get closer to the people and see into their minds. Many of them were having a hard time with money. Some were even facing eviction or rising medical bills, but they still used credit cards and wrote checks they couldn't afford. The most upsetting thing was how honest they were. They were sure that this was what God wanted. He told them, "My house will be called a house of prayer." But look at what they did with it. He took me behind the scenes and showed me the church's many businesses, the pastor's secret home, and the foreign accounts. However, he showed me the moral cost more than the financial one. A false religion was being spread that said the King of Kings was just like a cosmic vending machine. Jesus said, "They teach my people to serve money while saying they serve me." They take Bible verses that talk about being kind and use them to trick people. Pay attention. It changed to a small apartment where a mother by herself was crying over bills at her kitchen table. The same preacher was telling her on TV that a $1,000 seed would promise a big money gain. She grabbed her phone and called the church's gift line because she was sure that this was the way to get God's blessing. Christ said, "This breaks my heart. This lies keeps my kids from realizing how blessed they really are, how rich my grace is, how rich my presence is, and how abundant my love is." He showed me dozens of scenes like this one, with old people promising their retirement funds, students offering seeds with money from student loans, and families taking on debt to show their faith. Then he showed me something even scarier. He told them to look at what goes on in the spirit world. When someone gave out of fear or guilt instead of love, it felt like a dark cord wrapped around them and held them tighter to the false system. The evil spirits I had seen earlier fed on this energy and got stronger, while the real faith in people's hearts faded. He then led me to what he called true wealth. There were times when I felt like God was really there in small churches and other humble meetings. People were praying for each other, giving what they had, and helping each other out when they really needed it. They were also getting ahead, but not in the way that the megachurch preachers said they would. Jesus said that true wealth comes from a connection with me, not from formulas or seed offerings. My blessing on my children can include giving them money, but it never comes at the cost of taking advantage of them or turning my message into a deal. He showed me how these churches that were focused on making people rich had slowly become less true. Many people had good goals at first, but over time they were swayed by success, numbers, and power. As their businesses grew, they needed more and more money to keep them running, and they focused more on giving than on spiritual growth. Jesus told them, "Tell them that I never said that my church should be a business. In the same way that I want my children to be happy and healthy. Tell them that they have taken money from their God and called it faith." The scene changed again, and Jesus showed me something that broke my heart. Christians who had given up their faith because of what they saw and heard in churches that focused on making money. Some people gave away everything they had because they thought God would make it more valuable, but they lost everything. They went from being disappointed to being angry, and then from being angry to not believing. Christ told you to warn them because of this. It's not just lost money, it's also mental damage. They are getting people ready for the real message by giving them a false one that can't save them. Then he showed me the way out, how churches could get back to what the Bible says about wealth without giving into greed and taking advantage of others. Giving wasn't seen as a way to get God to help someone. It was taught as a way to respond to his love. I saw priests living simply because they cared more about feeding their flocks than making their names known. Christ then put his hand on mine again. He warned, "This is just the beginning. Now I have to show you something just as scary. Churches that have given up truth for fame." The scene in front of us ended, and we moved on to what he was going to say about churches that are open to seekers. This next insight showed me how many churches were giving up on the very core of the gospel in order to be current. As the next scene came into view, I thought at first that we were at a rock show or some other kind of entertainment venue. Moving spotlights and a professional-grade fog machine made the lighting amazing and the mood exciting. A lot of young people were there, and many of them were having coffee cups. They all seemed calm and happy. He said, "This is what many people now call church." As we watched, I thought I saw something strange. The crosses that were on the building were not religious symbols. They were more like art pieces. There was no sign of the word church. The building was called a life center or community center. Instead, Jesus told them to listen. I paid attention to what was being said from the stage. The speaker, who was wearing ripped jeans and a brand t-shirt, was joking and telling stories about everyday life. He was interesting and charming, but something was missing. The message where? I asked out loud. Jesus replied, "Exactly. They are more afraid of upsetting seekers than they are of offending me." I then saw him lead me into what looked like a planning meeting from earlier that week. Leaders of the church sat around a conference table and talked about the planned series of services. One boss said, "We need to be important. Let's talk about how to reach your goals in a series. Not anything too heavy. People already have a lot of stress in their lives." Someone else said, "Let's not use too much religious language. Words like sin and repentance could make people feel uneasy." Jesus let me see what was going on in their minds. Many people really thought they were doing the right thing by trying to make the message easier for more people to understand. But I could also see evil ghosts in the room, whispering ideas and supporting every compromise. Jesus told them to watch what happens when a famous person comes to visit. The scene changed to a church service on Sunday. A famous actress had come to testify. It was very crowded. The star talked about how he found faith while still living the high-class life of Hollywood. He never talked about turning away from sin or becoming different. He instead talked about how his faith in God had helped him do better. He told them, "Look at this. 5 years ago, he showed me the same church. They preached the whole truth. Back then, they spoke about sin and forgiveness, turning away from sin and being saved. They prayed for the sick and talked about important spiritual problems. What changed?" I asked. "Be afraid," Jesus responded. "Fear of losing group members. Fear of being called out of date. Do not want to offend the society. True love drives out fear, but they put pleasing people ahead of pleasing God." He showed me how this method to getting people to come to church had spread to churches in the US and other countries. I saw church after church adopt this plan, slowly taking away important parts of the gospel to make it more appealing to the world. Jesus said that they say they are reaching the lost, but they aren't telling them the truth. They are having fun with them on their way to destruction. I saw people go to these churches for years without ever hearing about the need to turn away from sin, without realizing what sin is, or knowing what the cross really means. At the end of each week, they felt good about themselves, but the same inside. Jesus then showed me how it would affect my spirit. I could see a thick haze, like spiritual smog, above all of these churches. It kept the real light of the gospel from getting through. People inside were slowly being protected against real Christianity. Jesus quoted the Bible to say that they had made a form of religion that denied its power. They give acceptance without change, acceptance without turning away from sin, and grace without truth. He showed me youth groups where leaders were scared to talk about sexual purity for fear of losing kids. I saw preachers skim over tough parts of the Bible because they were afraid they would upset someone. I saw prayer meetings being switched out for sessions on positive thought, but Jesus showed me something even worse that made my heart hurt even more. He showed me how spiritually hungry the people in these churches were. Even though there was fun stuff and good lessons, their souls were really hungry for spiritual food. Christ said, "My sheep know my voice." They really want the truth, but what they're getting is spiritual junk food. He had a lot of young people show me how many of them were quietly dealing with serious problems, like addiction, depression, and spiritual oppression. But instead of biblical advice and spiritual help, they were given motivational talks and went to concerts. Jesus then said, "Let me show you something even worse." The scene changed suddenly, and we saw the third warning. Pastors' worship is dangerous. The next thing I saw showed me how the enemy had created a complex form of idolatry inside the church. The scene that appeared in front of us was different from anything else I had seen. It looked like we were in another big church, but the vibe was different. I didn't like how the air felt heavy and spiritual. It made me feel uneasy. Jesus told them to be careful, because this might be the sneakiest trick of all. Things that happened next shocked me to my core. I saw the pastor walk into the church. People were putting their clothes on the ground so he could walk on them on his way to the platform. Others were crying, but not because they felt God's presence. They were crying because they were close to this man. Some people wanted to touch his clothes because they thought they had power. He told them, "This is what happens when people take my glory." I was then able to see into the spirit world above this church. The things I saw were scary. Spiritual beings that looked like angels of light, but were actually devils, were tricking people in a complicated way. They told other people in the church, "This man is special. He has a special calling. To hear from God, you need his okay." Jesus showed me what was going on behind the scenes in the pastor's office. He was surrounded by people who treated him like a king or queen. No one was brave enough to question his choices or his readings of the Bible. In a way, he had turned into a spiritual leader. Jesus said, "Look at what's missing." As I looked around, I saw that there were no signs of private prayer or a humble search for God. There were pictures, books, and accomplishments of the preacher all over the walls. Christ had been pushed to the background of what had become the pastor's own kingdom. Jesus told them, "Now look at what happened to my people." He showed me people in the church who had grown to depend on this preacher completely. Before making choices about their lives, they would talk to him first. The pastor said that women should follow their husband's guidance, but they didn't. Men were giving up their spiritual leadership roles in their homes and giving the preacher all of their spiritual power. Jesus said that this is not leadership. This hurts my heart. He showed me how these pastors use technology and social media to reach more people. Their names were on a lot of things, like books, podcasts, and merchandise. They were now well-known names and influencers. People thought their words were as good as or better than the Bible. Jesus said they made a priesthood that I got rid of at the cross. No one could get to the Father without going through me, because my death tore the temple veil. These men are putting up that cover again and acting as go-betweens. The scene changed to different churches where the same thing was happening over and over. I saw pastors expecting complete loyalty from their congregations, saying they had special revelations that couldn't be questioned, and twisting the Bible to keep power over their followers. He then showed me something even scarier, how it affected families. In some homes, the pastor's word was final, even if it went against what the Bible said. I saw marriages fail because the two people were more focused on getting their pastor's approval than on how God wanted their relationship to work. Jesus said to pay attention to what goes on in the spirit world. When people thought these preachers were almost godlike, dark spiritual cords would wrap around them. They were no longer able to clearly hear God's words. Their spiritual sense got worse. They were easy for lies to target. Jesus then said, "Let me show you how far this lie goes." He showed me a scene where a preacher was clearly teaching wrong, things that went against the Bible. But when members who were worried tried to bring this up, they were called divided and rebellious. No one could question the pastor's power anymore. He said, "They forgot that I am the leader of my church. They have made a new spiritual hierarchy instead of the priesthood of all Christians, which I never set up." After that, Jesus showed me how this system kept going. Young ministers were taught how to get people to follow them, make their own brands, and set up their own countries. The goal had changed from making followers of Christ to making followers of other people. In that case, what about the pastors? I asked. Jesus showed me that a lot of these leaders had sincere desires to serve, but over time they gave in to power, fame, and praise. The enemy had set up a clever trap that made them feel good about their own pride while shackling them. Jesus said it was sad that many of them don't even know they've turned into gods. He showed me how some pastors really thought they were better, more holy, and closer to God than other pastors. They were fooled by their own news media and stuck in a prison of fame and high rank. Then Jesus showed me how to fix this problem with the pastor's prayer. He showed healthy churches where leaders knew their job was to serve, not to be famous. I saw pastors who always led people to Christ, supported a personal relationship with God, and empowered the body to serve instead of making people dependent. He said, "These are my real shepherds. They take care of my sheep and bring them to me." But before I could fully think about what I had seen about pastor prayer, Jesus' face turned even more serious. He then told them, "I must show you the most dangerous lie of all the churches that are changing what sin is." The scene in front of us changed a lot. We were now watching what looked like a meeting of church leaders. There was a heavy spiritual feeling in the air. Jesus told them to watch how agreement starts. I watched as church leaders talked about how to change their views on some sins that are clearly stated in the Bible. Their goals seemed good. They wanted to love, accept, and connect with more people. But I could see that the evil psychic forces in the room were getting stronger with each compromise. He said that they call bad things good and good things bad. They switched light for darkness and darkness for light. He showed me how over time, these churches had stopped teaching biblical truth and started following popular culture. It began to soften language about sin, stay away from touchy subjects, and reinterpret clear biblical lessons to fit modern tastes. Jesus told them to look deeper. I saw church after church give up on following the Bible's rules about morals, marriage, and sexuality. What shocked me the most was how they used the Bible to defend these changes, changing God's words to back things He clearly didn't want. Jesus told them to watch what happens in the spirit world when the truth is harmed. I was scared by what I saw. Every time a church tried to change what sin was, instead of facing it head-on, a thick spiritual darkness would fall over the community. It got harder and harder for people to tell the difference between truth and mistake. Jesus said, "This is the pattern." To begin, they question whether the Bible really means what it says. Then they say that things have changed and that we need new ways of looking at things. Lastly, they say out loud that what I call sin is actually something I bless. He showed me churches that no longer believed in biblical marriage, where sexual immorality was seen as love, and where the fear of God had been replaced by a false grace that didn't require anyone to change. Christ told them, "Look at the cost." He told me about how these churches affect people spiritually. People who were dealing with sin were no longer free through grace and repentance. They were instead told that their sin wasn't really sin at all. This led to slavery that looked like freedom. Jesus used the Bible to show that they told them they would be free, but they are slaves to evil. I saw real believers in these groups go through a lot of inner conflict, even though their souls told them the truth. They were taught to ignore it for the sake of fitting in with society. The scene changed to show me church services where the cross was either not there at all or very small. Jesus said that there is no need to turn away from sin without the cross. There is no real escape without turning away from sin. He took me to youth groups where the real questions that young people had about sexuality and morals were answered with cultural wisdom instead of biblical truth. I saw kids getting lost because of lessons that went against both the Bible and natural law. Christ said that children suffer the most. They are learning that there is no one true thing and that they can make their own world. Man can choose for himself what is good and bad. This is the serpent's first lie. But Jesus showed me something even worse that made my heart hurt even more. He showed me how hard it was for preachers and other leaders to tell the truth because they were afraid of losing followers, getting bad feedback from the community, or being called hateful or intolerant. Christ said that fear is the enemy of the truth. True love gets rid of fear, but they have picked fear of people over fear of God. He showed me how these churches that give in to pressure can't help people really get free from sin. Jesus said that there can be no real change without truth. Acceptance without change, inclusion without repentance, and love without holiness are all things they offer. Jesus gave me one last command as my time with Him came to an end. Tell them that everything needs to be based on prayer and my name. I felt my soul being quickly pulled back into my body before I could say anything else. It felt like a strong force was pulling me in a gentle but firm way. Understanding that what I had seen and felt was real gave me a deep sense of peace. Then I was back in an instant when I woke up in the hospital. there were doctors and nurses all around me, looking shocked, and I could feel God's peace filling me again. I could feel my heart beating again, and my lungs taking in air again. I was still living. When I tell this story, I pray that those who hear it will be moved to return to a place of real prayer and connection with God. It was clear what Jesus wanted me to know. Turn around and go back to your first love. First look for my kingdom, and everything else will work out. Do not be swayed by false religions of wealth, acceptance, or worshipping celebrities. I mean what I say, and I really do have power. Come back to me, and I'll come back to you. I'm telling you this story to warn you and give you hope that God's people will turn back to Him with all their hearts before it's too late. I'll never be the same after Christ showed it to me. I hope you do too.